Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I'm your host, Wendy McCallum, and I'm here today with our very first male guest, which I forgot to tell you, Chase. So welcome.
I didn't know it was the first. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Chase. Yeah, we normally have female guests on this podcast, but I really wanted to have you on today because I want to talk to a man about burnout from the male perspective. So Chase Chewning is joining us from Los Angeles today. And why don't you just take a second and introduce yourself? Tell everybody what you do, how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, I guess I'll work my way backwards. I am here in Los Angeles. I've been here for about 2.5 years. I came here predominantly in support of a big career move for my wife. She has been a nurse for many years, and she wanted to pursue higher education, go back to school to become a nurse practitioner, which she just finished, just took her boards and got her license and everything. So we moved here from the East Coast. I'm from Washington, D.C. Her and I originally are both from Virginia. And I had spent quite a few years in D.C., the United States capital. And before that, I was all over the world. I spent 6 years active duty in the Army and spent a lot of time doing a lot of things. And I never would have guessed in a million years I'd be here in LA now, working predominantly as a health and wellness podcaster. Somehow in between that time, I went from recovering from injuries in the military to working in the health and fitness field and just kind of finding myself personally, professionally. And it took me about 10 years, and I finally filtered down to living out of fulfillment and loving what I do, waking up every day and serving other people through, social media, through the podcasting platform. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'm all over the coast here in the United States.
Yeah. And your podcast is the Ever Forward podcast.
Ever Forward Radio. Yep.
Yeah. Or Ever Forward Radio. And we kind of connected through podcasts, just both being podcast hosts.
That's right.
So I know that you have a really interesting story of burnout. I think you actually kind of have two burnout stories in your life. And I would love it if you would kind of walk us through your experiences with burnout, what they looked like, and, how you recovered from those.
Yeah. Let me start with the most recent one, because I think it was only through this most recent bout that I, to your point of the second one years ago, can look back and say, yes, absolutely. That was a form of burnout. And I didn't even really know how to label it. I didn't really know what I was going through. So I'd say probably early 2021, here we are in April now, and probably like around between February, hard in March, and then kind of fading out a little bit in April. I went through, what's that, about, 2.5 months of just extreme lack of motivation. I was very, very detached from my work that I just described as something that I love to do. I'm pretty sure I said I wake up and work out of fulfillment, and that was just not the case. And it was a weird dichotomy because I chose this career. I left a job years ago to pursue something that was so appealing to me and interesting to me, and creating my own life and my own job around this. And I, for the first time in 4 years, had to convince myself to show up, had to try to motivate myself to show up for things that I loved. I felt detached even from that work. I felt like I was just doing it for the sake of doing it. I was just kind of spinning my wheels. I was so mentally exhausted. What do they say? Tired but wired kind of thing. My body and my mind were just not cooperating. And even though I had such fatigue showing up for the work that I had to do, it didn't shut off my mind. I was just going a million different directions, a million miles an hour. And for the first time in many years, I could not focus. I could not just, dig deep, like all the things that I talk about when the going gets tough, the tough get going kind of thing. And I recognize this sensation. I recognize this physiological sensation of just what is going on with my body. Someone who tries so hard every day to stay in tune with his body, as a certified health coach, as someone who has gone to graduate school and has on paper done all the things you can do to make sure that this disconnect doesn't happen. I was experiencing extreme disconnect. And instead of trying to just cover it up, instead of trying to just plow through and ignore it, which I'll get to that first scenario, I just decided to kind of just let it be. I decided, excuse me, to just let it happen, because like a lot of things that I talk about, and like a lot of the work that I've found that has served me and my audience and clients, is that there's something here to be learned. There's something here that my body physically is trying to tell me. This is a stressor response that I need to pay attention to. This is some kind of emotional response that I need to pay attention to. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health. One of those areas, there's got to be something going on, because if everything was in harmony, then this wouldn't be happening, right? In theory. And so as uncomfortable as it was, and as the days went on and the weeks went on, when I was just fighting this I shouldn't say fighting, when I would wake up and hope that I could just get back to my normal again, I was just having this inner monologue with myself. And I was having very, very raw and vulnerable and emotional conversations with my wife, and even opening up to a few close friends of mine that I knew could relate. And here's what I wasn't doing, Wendy. I wasn't trying to solve a problem quickly. I wasn't trying to just someone tell me an answer. It was just an outpour of here's what I'm feeling, thinking, experiencing. And in doing so, pretty much every time, I got a little bit closer to something that, oh, maybe this is why. Oh, this is kind of where I'm feeling it in my body. Or, oh, this is when I'm kind of feeling or experiencing it throughout the day or throughout my workflow. So I began to kind of just, again, let it be, let it pour out of me, get objective feedback, and then just take notes. Like anybody who is trying to maybe go down a wellness journey or change any kind of behavior, before hopefully you would change any variable, you would want to at least get a litmus test of what is going on. What is your norm kind of thing? And then establish, I want to keep this, I want to maintain that, more of this, less of that. And so that's what I did. I kind of just went back to my health coaching roots and the things that worked well for me years ago. And eventually kind of just realized, oh, when I'm doing this type of thing in my work, I don't like it anymore. So I began to kind of change my workflow. When I would post this thing on social media, I would feel very in alignment, or I would feel like I was forcing it. So I literally changed the design of a lot of my templates in my design work. And I even changed, as a podcaster, I film a lot of my show in person here in LA. I literally changed where I filmed in my home. I changed up the set. I rearranged my entire office. And that gave me a lot of new, if you will. It's a very, very scientific term, new. And then all these things helped put me on the path to healing. It wasn't one thing personally. It wasn't one thing that solved my problems. It wasn't one thing that made me feel energized again, that made me feel super connected to my work, that did all of the things. It was just letting it be, not suppressing it, and just learning from it, taking note and learning from it and applying it. And it was a multi-week process. Like I said, I'm still going through it a little bit, but I am much happier where I am. I'm very proud of the progress that I've made in the conversations I've had with those trusted people around me. And yeah, this really shined a light on kind of a past experience. It was in a way a little bit of a trigger to reliving similar experiences that I had, one in particular about 7 years ago. And this was summer 2015, when I, again, seemingly had all my ducks in a row. Everything was going great. I was the strongest I had ever been. I was in the peak of my training. I was the leanest I had ever been. I was getting promoted in my job. I had just moved into this new place. I was moving up from one place in Virginia to DC, and all these things outside looking in were great. But I was working on everything else other than my mental health. I was suppressing a lot of my emotions. Things that were going on in certain relationships in my life, things that I had experienced, like the loss of my father, just this really horrific death in my life of my hero due to a terminal illness that I never dealt with. I just stuffed down. And how that reared its ugly head was through extreme panic attacks, high anxiety. I would became unsafe, honestly, in several public scenarios. I would hear a song that my father and I used to listen to driving in the car to work, and next thing I know, I was swerving off into a ditch. I couldn't go to a movie theater where there was a death scene because I would just completely be transported back in time. In my body, I would go through panic attacks. I would have to leave the theater. I couldn't watch certain movies. I became, unfun for a lot of people, and my girlfriend then and my wife now to be around for certain things. And it was only, that was a very strong physiological response. And it was a big red flag. Hey, Chase, these are things you absolutely have to work on. And so I began to do a lot of self-work, journaling, began to finally get open and honest and vulnerable with my now wife, then girlfriend, like I said, and really truly with myself, and also even go back to getting professional help, because it was very clear that I had some strong tools in my toolbox to assist with this, but I was out of my league in a lot of other things. And so help was necessary.
Yeah. Thanks for telling us all of that. I think when you were talking, what I was thinking to myself, you were talking about, it's hard to like pin it down. It sounds like it didn't show up in one particular way or another. And I've said this many times before. I think burnout is like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like we don't
seriously.
It's not one thing that gets us there. It's all kinds of things, and they can, accumulate over time. And the reason why I think that's important to understand that is that I think that the healing from burnout is also not ever just one solution. It's almost like healing by 1,000 band-aids, right? So I got to fix this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. So there are often many different areas of our life that we need to look into and work on. So we've got mostly women who listen to this podcast, which you and I have talked about. And really, I wanted to do this podcast because I know that, especially right now during the pandemic, there are lots of men out there struggling with burnout. There are lots and lots of women out there struggling with burnout too, but I've dealt with that in a million other episodes. On this episode, I really want to kind of hone in on men's burnout and how women can kind of be on the lookout for that, and what they can do to support men in their life that they love, whether it's their partner, their dad, their son, and what might make men's burnout like a little bit different from women's burnout. So when you look back on your most recent burnout, can you kind of articulate what it felt like? So the piece you talked about was what they call kind of depersonalization or cynicism, which is a really common sign of burnout. So that just kind of like feeling disconnected and, not feeling emotionally invested in your work anymore. Was there anything else that you noticed in this?
One thing that maybe this is, I don't know, just people in relationships can really relate. So I'm married, my wife, I don't know about you, but in certain relationships, especially intimate, husband, wife, partner, you kind of check in with each other, right? At the end of the day, not only, hey, how was your day? But I asked for your help with something. Hey, did you run this errand? Hey, did you send that email? Hey, did you talk to your mom? What about this big project you told me you were working on? Let me get some updates, kind of thing. And it began to kind of feel like I had to scramble to come up with an answer. My wife, we check in with each other a lot, and we love to support each other in everything we got going on personally, but also we're running a household together. So we need to support each other. And I felt like I was kind of trying to not lie, but come up with something that I felt like would have satisfied as an answer for what she was looking for in those, in that pillow talk, or in, checking in with each other during dinner. And what I would encourage a partner, a wife, a husband, if your partner is experiencing this, is to give them a little bit more grace, because she definitely, and she didn't know it because I wasn't fully honest, in the beginning. I was still processing it. So, oh, well, I thought you said you were going to do this, or you've had 2 days to do this thing, or you were going to help me out with this, whatever. And she began to get a little bit frustrated. And so I would say, I would really hope that in the beginning, maybe things slip your mind, your partner's mind, whatever. But if it's kind of happening more than once, or similar things, or even small tasks are just out of character, slipping through the cracks, and it just doesn't make sense. She began to get frustrated with me, and she could tell. She was like, what's going on, kind of thing. So it was a little bit of frustration, but then a little bit of grace. And that grace helped me, I think, feel more comfortable in opening up. I feel very comfortable opening up to her no matter what. That's just kind of the nature of our relationship. But this was so different for me that I was still processing it personally. Therefore, I didn't quite know how to process and share with her what was going on, what I needed. So if these small things are kind of slipping through the cracks, or if your partner, your husband, your boyfriend is seemingly off more than usual, please don't get frustrated with it, but just in a loving way, follow up. Why didn't this get done? Or what can I support you with? Or it just seems like something's going on. Let them know that it's okay to open up like that.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a couple different signs of burnout, I think, combined there. And one of them is that our personal relationships almost always start to suffer. So when people are in burnout, and it's, again, it's that depersonalization, that distancing thing. People in burnout are generally exhausted. They're mentally exhausted. They're emotionally exhausted. And so that is, of course, going to play out in personal relationships, and oftentimes with the people we feel the closest to, because it's the safest space, right? It's the safest place to be totally real. And what you're feeling is not good. And the other piece of it, with the forgetting to do things or just not being as organized and efficient with your tasks and time, that's also part of burnout. So we almost always see decrease in productivity and efficiency when people are feeling burnt out. So I can see how those things would come together. So I guess the thing I'm trying to figure out is how we know if someone's in burnout. So how do we know when it's gone from just, general forgetfulness or just a busy life to a problem, So at what point did you start thinking to yourself, well, wait a second, this isn't just like, I'm not just tired here. There's something more going on.
I began to honestly just say whatever I was feeling out loud to myself, but especially to my wife. And in the beginning, it was kind of looking back, I'm kind of laughing now because she was just like, okay, all right. I was like, I'm feeling kind of funny. Like, I feel off, or I didn't know what I was feeling, but I just knew that it wasn't my norm. And so I consciously, I chose to just, again, express it.
Mm-hmm.
I began to just say, I don't know, I'm just not feeling myself, or I'm feeling off, or quite literally, I'm pretty sure I said most of the time, I feel like I'm in a funk. I feel off. And at first she was just like, okay, like that's nice kind of thing. But she's very, very in tune with everybody. And it was probably after a couple of days of that, she began to ask very specific follow-up questions. She would check in with me more often. And so I think it takes a little bit of both sides. It takes a little bit of that awareness and personal courage on the husband, on the person experiencing that burnout, to just, you may not know how to label what you're feeling or even express it, but you know that it's different. And just getting it out, and especially in that safe space, like you were saying, with your partner, like they're going to know you. They're going to at least be able to help you kind of pull that out a little bit more and articulate it and just talk through it. And I mean, she didn't know exactly what was going on either, but how could she know if I never said anything otherwise? And so the more I began to get more comfortable just sharing it and expressing it, she could then pull it out of me a little bit more. And then we could, as a team, work together through it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was just reading a study, I don't know, last week or something, about the difference between burnout in men and women. And they've done some research on it. And what the research indicates is, so there are 3 kind of stages of burnout. And normally they would kind of fall in this order. So normally you would start with that exhaustion, mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion. Then you would move into cynicism and depersonalization. So where you're just starting to be like, the glass is half empty. I can't stand my clients. I don't like my patients. Whoever you're working
I'm nodding
with,
my head. So far,
I don't
so
like my
true.
boss. I'm just done with everything, right? This depersonalization phase. And then you move into like reduced productivity and lower efficiency. But interestingly, what the research shows, which I think you're kind of backing up right now with your story, is that when you look at women, they follow that pattern. So women tend to show as their first sign of burnout, this overwhelm and exhaustion. The second sign for them is this, my glass is now half empty instead of half full. I'm feeling annoyed with everybody, and then the third stage for them is the decreased productivity. But men are different. So the first stage for men typically is the depersonalization. So it's the, I don't like what I'm doing anymore. I feel detached from this. I don't like the people I'm working with. I'm irritated by everything. And then the exhaustion comes next for men. which is interesting because it sounds like your first symptom, this first clue that you had that something wasn't right was just this feeling of like, just generally not wanting to be doing the thing you're doing and just sort of being irritated and, yeah. So that's interesting. I literally was just doing research for this podcast because I have never really explored men's burnout as compared to women's burnout before. I know a lot about general burnout, but I've never looked at the gender differences. And it's interesting that that was your experience. Okay. So obviously a big piece for you of coming out of this burnout was talking. So actually talking about what was going on, how you were feeling, which, we know, you and I both know this, we're both coaches. So we know that when we hold emotion in, when we hold stuff in that's bothering us and we don't talk about things, it just means it takes us a whole lot longer to heal from things. And so, but that is not, first nature for most human beings, especially men. So in my experience, anyway, I'm generalizing here. I think women are generally better at emoting. We still struggle with it. We still don't want to be vulnerable. We still try to do everything ourselves, but I think we are, and again, big generalization here, better than men at discussing our feelings. So, what advice do you have for women out there who are worried that somebody that they love, a man that they love, is maybe in burnout or starting to burn out? What advice do you have in terms of how to get that conversation going? Like, what's a comfortable way for me to say to my spouse, like, are you in burnout? Are you burning out here? Like, should I be worried? How do we broach that conversation?
Yeah, that's I guess that's $1 million question. Before I answer, I'll caveat by saying I believe, and I'm sure you would agree, that every relationship is different. You will know, I think, a safe and good place to start in terms of just odds are you've been there before.
Yeah.
Odds are you've had something uncomfortable or really important, but just delicate that you need to talk about. So I would say just go back to what has worked for you in the past in terms of, is it this tone? Is it always when we're at our favorite restaurant? Or the more familiarity you can add is already going to prime your husband, your partner for that kind of familiar conversation.
Yeah. Well, you're necessarily putting the person in a vulnerable position. The person isn't necessarily going to, if they're going to be honest about it, a piece of it is going to be, I'm not doing so great, and maybe I need some help here. And that's always the hardest thing for any of us, whether we're male or female, to admit. So I think that's great advice, to try to create a safe atmosphere that feels familiar. And I mean, my suggestion honestly would be just to ask this simple question: are you okay?
Yeah.
Like, how are you really doing?
Yeah.
I would say though, maybe I'll just recap these signs of burnout, these common signs of burnout for people who are listening, Chase, because these are the types of things you probably want to be looking out for in your partner if you're worried, or it could be like I said, could be your adult son, it could be your brother, some male in your family, or in your life that matters to you, that you're worried about. Here are some of the signs of burnout, and these are the same really for men or women, like I said, although the order that they present might kind of flip around. Exhaustion, that cynical depersonalization we were talking about, the glass half empty attitude, as I call it. Decreased work performance, so decreased productivity, decreased ability to focus, being preoccupied by work when you're not there. So thinking about your job all the time. So even if it's not positive thoughts, you're thinking about it all the time. It's hard for you to leave it behind and just break away from it. Does that sound familiar?
It does.
Yeah. And not taking care of yourself. So, if you've noticed that the person that you're concerned about has been slipping away from some of those habits that they rely on to keep themselves healthy. So things like, good sleep, exercise, healthy food. If they're not doing those things anymore, that can be a sign. Of course, not one of these things means burnout. It's a kind of a combination of all of these, and you can have some of these and not all of them and still be in burnout. This is just kind of a list.
Unique kind of perfect storm for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unique to the individual.
There's no real diagnosis of burnout available either. It's more of a condition. They call it an occupational condition now. Increased reliance on unhealthy coping mechanisms. So this is a big one. And I know that this is happening right now for many, many people because of this pandemic. So one thing that we know for sure is that some of those coping mechanisms that are less healthy for us are on the rise. Things like unhealthy food, eating, sugar, alcohol. Also, using social media as a tool to escape. And, with women that I work with, it's often online shopping is another one, can be sometimes gambling. An over-reliance on an unhealthy coping mechanism can be a sign of burnout, because it's just us doing our best to take care of ourselves and to just get out of Dodge. Like, how can I get out of this uncomfortable place that I don't want to be in anymore? As I said earlier, that friction in personal relationships is really common. So your relationships just start to suffer. You just feel like you're not quite as close as you want to be, or you used to be with the person. You don't want to connect like you wanted to connect before. There's just something off there. And that may lead to more arguments. And that also shows up with coworkers a lot. So it's not just friction in personal relationships, it's also friction with professional relationships. And then generally, this is one I see all the time with the women that I work with who are in burnout, just like a decreased satisfaction in life. Like they're just not satisfied anymore like they used to be. So they're now thinking to themselves, you actually said it, you said something very similar to this, which is, I kind of had everything on paper. Everything was lined up. I had all the things that I kind of thought were the important things to, allow me to live a fulfilled life, but I still wasn't happy. Like it still felt like something was missing. That's a really common sentiment in people that are feeling burnt out. And then of course you didn't get here, obviously, but at the end of burnout, if it gets left unchecked and it goes on for too long, it can lead to health consequences as well. So it can lead to things like high blood pressure and depression and type 2
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Heart disease, those types of things. But those are just some of the things to be on the lookout for if you're concerned. But I think, the thing to do is to start the conversation. And as Chase said in his own experience, in his story, and also, as I said, the research seems to back this up. With men, it often shows up with that cynicism. So a change in your attitude, like you were always kind of a positive person, but now you're just feeling cranky all the time and you're cynical and you don't really want to be doing the things that you're doing. And you're kind of depersonalizing and separating yourself from the work that you do and the people in your life. So I would say that's probably the biggest warning sign that you would see with men, is my guess.
Yeah. And I think to that point, I'm a guy, I've been a guy for 35 years. So I'll speak to that experience.
Yeah.
Why I think that might be true, Wendy, is because of, I don't know, our natural essence, a way that we were raised. Me personally, like I said, I was active duty Army for 6 years. So I've been conditioned for a long time to, just because something is difficult doesn't mean you don't have to do it. Sometimes the days are going to feel hard. The days are going to feel heavy. It's going to feel heavier than usual. You need to push through. And that's quite literally what I talk about in the crux of my mantra, ever forward, ever forward, ever forward.
Right.
But there came a point, so that's why I felt detached and it was just meh, but I still was forcing myself to push through, because I at first just thought, okay, I'm just off. Okay. I knew these days were going to come. They can't always be, amazing. They can't always be 10 out of 10 days. But when those days are consecutive, when those days go on for days, weeks, and you're no matter what you're doing with your work, your friends, your family, when the days and the events all seem to kind of have that same underlying tone of disconnect, and you have to feel like you have to really talk yourself up, hype your own hype man for anything and everything you want to do.
Yeah.
Like, pay attention to that. There's a point when you need to kind of just, dig deep and find some motivation and push through. But if those are the only days you're having, then there's something else going on.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the tools that you use? I mean, I know you're obviously a healthy guy. That's your wellness coach. This is what you do. What are some of the kind of pieces of non-negotiable self-care for you that you think are important in, preventing another burnout?
Sleep, for sure. As staying as consecutive and diligent with your sleep cycles as possible, your natural circadian rhythm. And by that, I mean, as many days of the week as possible, going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. That has always been a big focus of mine, or at least the past several years, but just really focusing more on that and ways to support that. So a healthy morning and evening routine. So in the morning, making sure within the first, 30 minutes to an hour, I'm getting out of bed, I'm moving my body, whether that's some light stretching, flexibility, taking the dog for a walk, grounding. I actually intentionally added in more regularly. By that, I mean, barefoot, connecting with the earth, making sure that I'm really resetting my circadian rhythm and in tune with where I am. I was a couple of times traveling in that burnout period. So making sure I was just contributing to my body's circadian cycle as much as possible, getting sunshine as, within the first 2 hours, ideally. But I would even go as far as saying within the first 30 minutes of when you wake up, if you can just get some direct sunlight, if you can, as much of your skin exposed as possible to just enhance those photoreceptors through your eyes, through vitamin D in your skin, just give your body a fighting chance, stack the conditions as soon as possible in the day to help lower cortisol, to just increase vitamin D. All these things are going to be naturally, aiding in your energy and sleep cycles. And then in the evening, or I should even say throughout the day, I became even more conscious of how much caffeine I was consuming, when I was consuming it, cutting back my caffeine cutoff time. I truly try to cut off by about 2. I shaved it down to about noon so that there was less of it in my system later on in the evening. And then in the evening, having a harder cutoff time before I would want to go to bed. Typically about an hour to an hour and a half is when my, I guess, usual evening routine would kick in. And that's, blue light blockers on, that's lowering the lights in the house, that's putting my phone away, putting my work away. But I began to even do it 2, if not even 3 hours. I began to try to drive as much of a wedge to separate work and stress and things that could cause more of a trigger, if you will, or a flare up or aggravation, and just allow myself to kind of get more into that parasympathetic, that rest and digest period, so that I could more easily go into sleep and actually get good quality restorative sleep.
I love that. I was laughing. Sorry, I was smiling. If you're watching the video, you would have seen me smiling only because when you were talking about getting the sunshine first thing in the morning, I was thinking you clearly live in LA and I do not, because it would be
a little bias there. Yeah.
Maybe I could be guaranteed sunshine in the first 30 minutes after I woke up 2 days out of 7 where I live. But I hear what you're saying. And I absolutely agree with you on the whole idea of like getting into the rhythms that your body is supposed to be in. I always say it's so important to get, that your body trusts you, that your body knows what's going to happen next so that it can behave in the way it's supposed to behave. And it's not in panic mode all the time. And all of those things you were talking about are the types of practices that allow your body to trust you and be able to rely on you and stay out of fight or flight, which is the whole goal here. Because we didn't talk about this at all, but I talk about fight or flight all the time on this podcast. Burnout is just chronically elevated stress. That's what burnout is. It's, it's when we're in fight or flight and we're just in it for way too long and we stay there and we are not able to, or we're just not actively working at trying to pull ourselves out of that. So anything basically that signals to your body, everything's okay, you're where you're supposed to be, you're not running away from the saber-toothed tiger, is going to help pull you out of fight or flight and into the relaxed state.
Wendy, I even went a step further. I'll even say, this is what I did, my wife and I did, and what I would even recommend. If it gets to the point to where you're really unsure of what's going on and you're really worried, your partner is worried about you, of course, seek professional help if necessary. But before getting to that point, what we did, we took a vacation. We actually, we flew to Jamaica for about 4 or 5 days and really got a lot of sunlight. I mean, you could just, even before that, we did like a quick little weekend trip, just 1 day trip, packed an overnight bag and just insert something where you're going to be not working or very, very little. Give your body, your brain, your head and your heart as much of a fighting chance as possible to truly rest and to take it easy. That one overnight trip we did maybe about week 3 into my burnout, I honestly think was like the buffer that saved me from it getting catastrophically worse. And then when things weren't quite so balancing out, and it was, to be honest, it was her birthday too. And so we kind of had a little bit of an excuse. We wanted to travel. So we went somewhere that was safe and was open. And I actually, after that trip, I lost I'd say about 2 to 3 pounds. I could tell in my body just finally let go of it. I mean, when you're in a highly stressed state, cortisol is elevated, your body is going to hold on to fat. So you can be doing all the right things, your nutrition, your training, but if your stress is just constantly elevated, your body's not going to want to let go of that because that's safety, that's energy. So after that vacation, I lost weight. My bloating went down a little bit. I even measured it. I used a wearable here, a Whoop device. And during that time, when I was doing nothing but just eating food, having fun tropical drinks and chilling on the beach, my resting heart rate dropped by about 10, 12 beats per minute. My heart rate variability increased by almost 20 points. So by inserting as much just calm as I could, it gave my body the best fighting chance it could to just really, really reset. And ever since we came back from that vacation, I've been back in action.
Yeah, vacations are great if you can take them. I have a couple things I wanted to say that just made me think of as you were chatting there. One is that I have heard this. I do not diagnose or treat because I am not a health practitioner. I'm just a coach, but I work with women in burnout all the time. And I have heard on a number of occasions that the medical approach to burnout is often this. If you take a weekend off from work and you still feel terrible going back to work Monday morning, so you're still dreading it, and you still have all the same feelings that you had the last week at work, then that wasn't enough time to take off.
Mm-hmm.
Take a week off. If then after a week off, you still feel the same way going back to work, then that's a sign that you're still in burnout and you need to take a longer period of time off. And then take a couple of weeks off and see how you are coming back to work after that. And can be a really good litmus test for people to determine whether they actually need a leave, because many of the women that I work with they're really in burnout. They're in full burnout. They are highly successful women with very big jobs and lots of responsibility, and usually are also responsible for other people. So they're caregivers, they're mothers, and or responsible for aging parents at the same time. And so they're kind of in the sandwich of stress. And for them, one of the biggest questions when I start with them is, am I going to have to quit my job? And I'm always really honest.
I can imagine.
I'll say, most of the women that I work with, no, they don't need to quit their job. There are lots of things that we can do to help support you in burnout and to create a set of healthy habits that will actually support you, help you manage your stress better, and help you pull out of this. Will you need to take some time off? Maybe. And might that be a long time? Possibly, but let's start where we are and kind of go from there. But, taking a leave from work is very often necessary. I don't know if you know this, but I burnt out myself. I was a lawyer for 12 years and I left my job as a lawyer in full burnout. I had no idea that's what was going on, but I have now, with all of the knowledge I have, I look back at these list of symptoms and I'm like, yeah, I pretty much had every single one of those, including an unhealthy and growing reliance on alcohol. And I needed to leave. There was no way, there would have been no way for me to recover from this, even if I had known what it was in the job that I was in with the responsibilities and obligations that I had. It would have been impossible. So sometimes you need more than that. If you can take a break, that's great. So I agree with what you said there. The other thing I was thinking as you were talking is for people who can't take a break. So partly still, Chase, we are still in full lockdown where I am. I know you guys, everything's opening up there for you. So travel has become somewhat possible for a lot of Americans, but it's not for most Canadians right now. And there's really nowhere to go for a lot of people. So or maybe you just can't afford to go on vacation. But in that situation, what I would recommend is really trying hard to make sure that there's a division between work and your personal life. So getting better at actually compartmentalizing your job and turning off your devices and, not checking email after, 5:30 p.m. or whatever. And on the weekends, really committing to not doing work on the weekends and focusing on actually relaxing, self-care, spending time with people you love, all of those things that we know that help to close the stress cycle. So if you can take a vacation, by all means, go for it. If you can't, try to create almost like a mini break for yourself whenever possible by shutting things down. Okay. What about the role of, I know you're big into fitness. So what about the role of fitness and exercise in terms of managing mental health and, preventing burnout for men?
Yeah. Fitness, exercise, prolonged physical activity can be a sensitive area, a delicate area when we're talking burnout, because it is, if we're truly in a state of burnout, it is truly a physiological and psychological state of being. Your body and your mind, every system is overloaded. It's taxed, and or one of them is just holding on for dear life. And so you have to be very careful. In general, exercise is going to be a great thing for enhancing mood, for stabilizing mood, for general wellness, lowering blood pressure, heart rate variability, sleep, all of these things that we know it can do for us in terms of endorphins and hormonal response, and you name it. It's a good thing. But if we are in a heightened stress state, in a prolonged heightened stress state, adding more stress, although a good stress, stress, a positive stress in the body, is still stress on the body, and it can be too much for the body to handle. My point here is that someone may be thinking, oh, well, if I just do something that's going to be a positive effect to my body, then that's going to solve my problems or solve one of them. It might, but tread lightly. Don't go, high intensity if you're already in this state of burnout. I would really honestly recommend just insert daily and prolonged general physical activity, not devoted exercise. And if you do want to go to the exercise route, I'm not talking high intensity interval training, no CrossFit, no, nothing where your heart rate's getting super elevated for prolonged periods of time. Things like yoga, things like walking at least 20 minutes. Ideally, I would say 30 to 40 minutes a day. Slow, steady state activities are actually going to be more beneficial in this period than what you may be used to in your general exercise routine.
Yeah, I love that you gave that answer. So I love the answer that you gave, because I think what a lot of people don't understand is that physical exercise is a form of physical stress, and physical stress has exactly the same response in our bodies as emotional and mental stress does. So we go into fight or flight. It causes cortisol and adrenaline to rise. Exactly the same response happens. And so it is really important when you're struggling with, pre-burnout or burnout, to be aware of the fact that that might just add more fuel to the fire. And I also love what you said about yoga and walking, because I'm a huge fan of, I call it joyful movement. So there's a place for intense exercise, and I'm a gym rat myself. I love working out, but I also know that if you don't love what you're doing, if it doesn't feel good, you're not going to keep doing it. And I think that it's really important, especially when we're talking about, when you're in a mental state like burnout, or you're really struggling with any other mental health issue. It's really important to make sure that whatever you choose to do feels good. And it's in burnout, I think gentle exercise is key. Something that, again, you want to be signaling to your brain that you're no longer being chased by the saber-toothed tiger, right?
We're good. We're okay.
Everything's okay. I have time to do yoga and breathe deeply and all the rest of it. So I love that answer. Thank you for sharing that.
And more particularly, I'll say yin yoga. Yin is a style. I would probably even, I would not say Bikram or hot yoga, or honestly, even some vinyasa flows. I would say something like a yin or a restorative yoga, where it's slow movements. You're holding positions for longer periods of time. And honestly, walking. If I had to give one answer to your question, Wendy, what would exercise look like for someone who is experiencing burnout or think they are? Stop whatever workout routine you're doing, walk. Daily walks. It is so restorative for the mind and the body, and it helps, clinically proven to help return to more of a parasympathetic state. So that's what I would really lean into.
Yeah. And if you're female listening to this podcast and you're thinking someone in your life who's male might be struggling with burnout, ask them to go for a walk with you. Kill two birds with one stone. Have the conversation. Exactly. Have the conversation while you're walking. How are you really doing? What's really going on with you? And open up that dialogue, because I think one of the most, as we talked about right at the beginning of this episode, one of the most important pieces of recovering from burnout is talking about what's going on, is actually reaching out and having those conversations. And I will say this, burnout rates are significantly on the rise. They've been on the rise for the last however many years, but now throw this crazy pandemic into it, and they're really skyrocketing right now. So you're not alone in this. And whoever this person is that you're worried about right now, they're not alone in this. It's going to become, I think, like the next pandemic, to be honest. I think we have some pandemics within the pandemic. One of them is over drinking. But I also think burnout is in there. And I think a lot of people are going to be coming out of this pandemic, looking to make positive change, recognizing that they need to take better care of themselves.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. That's my hope in all of this. I really appreciate you being so honest in telling your story. I think it's really helpful for women to hear that men feel this way too. If you're listening to this podcast and you've been through burnout yourself, everything you feel is what that male you're worried about is feeling too, maybe in a different order, but it's all the same stuff. And the very best thing that you can do is just let that person know that you're there for them, and that you're ready and willing to have the conversation, and encourage them to reach out and get professional help if they need it. Absolutely. Well said. It's been great being here, Wendy. Thank you so much. And honestly, hopefully this adds value for your audience, and at least one person can relate, and this helps them in their relationship. But
truly, in a way, like I said, I'm not out of the woods yet. So the more that I am able to talk about this, like in our conversation here today, this has been very valuable for me in my continued work through this. So thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. Well, it is a long road back from burnout. I know that. I mean, my burnout was it peaked in like 2007, and I left my job in 2008. I took a full year off. So I took an entire year off. I was home with my 2 4-year-old kids. I mean, that's not really taking a year off, to be honest, but I was,
I don't doubt it.
But I was with my kids for a year, and I always say, like, I think it took me about 10 years to get to a place where I feel like I'm balanced again. I had to work on creating a whole new set of healthy habits and trying to figure out, what was actually the right balance for me. And so it's not an overnight solution. I don't think it takes most people 10 years, but for me, it was a long time coming, and I had a lot of work to do to get back to I didn't even get back to actually create the right balance for me. I don't think I ever had it. So appreciate your honesty. And thank you so much for sharing your story today, Chase. And if people want to know more about you, where can they find that out?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me on the show. And also, I'm very excited to have you on Everforward Radio soon. That's definitely where I am hanging out the most. We put out multiple episodes per week. Wherever people listen to podcasts, we're there, Everforward Radio. And if I'm not in podcast space, I'm over on Instagram. So at Chase_Chewning. It's much more just my personal life, but I do share what's going on in my life. I share resources, I share conversations, all things fitness, nutrition, mindset. So if any of this rings a bell for your audience, then come on over. I'd love to have you and hopefully help you out.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Chase. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. If you've been putting yourself last for way too long and are worried that you're burning out, grab your free burnout checklist at www.wendymccallum.com/checklist. That's www.wendymccallum.com/checklist.